11.0. Y'all need to put on your seatbelts. You think we're getting to the end, but now we're getting to the meat of the meeting. So it's going to be a little long here, but it's a good long because we're getting to budget time. So I'm going to turn it over to 11.1, which is a report from our superintendent, Dr. Greg Little. And board, this is for information only, Dr. Little.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Because of what you just talked about and the length of what's getting ready to happen, I'm going to forego my normal comments, except to say again, a lot of great things happening in Lexington 1 as we come to the end of the year. But I'd now like to turn it over to Mr. John Butler to do the first reading of our general fund budget. And just to remind the board, the first reading of our budget, and I don't want to step on any of the thunder that that Mr. Butler will be bringing, but I just wanted to remind the board that the first reading really serves as a first draft of our budget. Many of the numbers that we have are estimates, and as we go through the budget process, the numbers will begin to tighten up because we'll have more solid figures from both county and state government. So just as a reminder about what we're looking at tonight. So Mr. Butler.
Thank you. Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Little. This is our first reading of the fiscal year 2020 school year for our general fund operating budget. So I wanted to start off just kind of making a clarification, a difference between an operating budget and a capital budget. We seem to get a good number of questions regarding that. So an operating budget is used to pay for the day-to-day operations of the school district. It includes things like salaries, purchase services, travel, rentals, printing, supplies, dues and fees, everything that we pay for the day-to-day operations of the school district. A capital budget, on the other hand, is really kind of covered by law and bond covenants and direction from the district. So that covers things like major buildings, technology, and renovation projects. It also includes some other items such as buses, library books, and band instruments and uniforms. So you cannot use capital funds to pay for operations, and I think that's where a lot of people kind of get.
And I think a lot of people get confused with the bond referendum money. They don't understand that when our constituents give us permission and that we pass a bond referendum, that we are obligated by law to fulfill exactly what was in the referendum. We can't take that money and say increase teacher pay or increase Dr. Little's pay. We can't do that, can we?
No, sorry about that.
It's against the law. And I always tease I don't look very good in orange, so.
Yeah, neither do I. So we'll start out looking at our student population. This is the students that we had for the 6 years that we have the numbers for, and then the projection for next year. So for this year, at the 135th day, we had 25,999 students, which is an increase of 488 students. Looking to next year, we're looking at an increase pretty close to that, about 511 students. That would take us to 26,510 students. So that 25,999 students this year is K through 12. If you include preschool, that's another 826 students for an overall total of 26,825 students. So some things that we considered going into the budget process was to meet mandated expenditures without sufficient state funding to meet those expenditures. I'm sure you all are very familiar with the term unfunded mandates. That's basically what that is. Provide for student growth. We have to meet state and federal requirements. Also the inflationary cost. You know, if the utilities go up and light bills go up, we have to pay that amount or they cut the lights off. So we had to consider that. And then to ensure the quality and support for students and staff. And then if you look at the priorities for next year's budget, I guess it was 3 years ago, Dr. Little came with a initiative of a drive to 35, which meant that our starting teachers, straight out of college, no experience, just a bachelor's degree, which is the lowest paid on the teacher salary schedule, would be at least $35,000. This budget, as is proposed tonight, would actually make that about $35,150. So we will make that drive to 35 this next year. It includes the state mandated 4% teacher salary increase. It also includes a step increase for all eligible certified support and administrative employees. Priority would be, we have to open Beechwood Middle School. And then we wanted to offer supplemental student support. Those are things like special ed resources, ESOL, interventionists, psychologists, and mental health counselors. And then another priority was to at least maintain current class ratios. Obviously, it would be great if we could reduce those, but given the restriction on the money that we have available, at least maintain the current class ratios. All right, this is the recommended certified staff that we propose to be adding for fiscal year 20. 6 new elementary certified, 25.7 middle school certified, 5.6 high school certified, and also includes 5 pool positions. So when we talk about certified, that includes classroom teachers, guidance counselors, interventionists, math coaches, those types of people. Excuse me. We also wanted to put a emphasis on special needs students and give them support. So it's adding 16.8 special needs certified and licensed professionals. That includes the board certified behavioral analyst, includes resource teachers, speech teachers, primary high support in K through 2, and autism teachers. So that kind of makes up that 16.8. So this slide really kind of looks at excluding Beechwood. This would just kind of be normal growth for our district. So that's adding 36.3 certified and licensed professionals, a 0.7 support staff. Now you look at that and say, 0.7, 91,000. No, we're not paying somebody a 0.7 at 91,000. That's a net figure. We have some reductions and additions for support staff. And some of the support staff we added are the higher paid salary. We have a nurse, a carpenter, a job coach, and those pay higher than, say, an instructional assistant, so that's why the 91,000. We actually have a reduction in central services administrative staff of 3. That would be my position since I'm retiring. That includes the director of accounting. Hopefully that will be able to work out. And also includes a director's position in communication. And then we're adding 1 school administrative staff. And then we're also adding some supplements, additional days, and temporary salaries. The supplements really are, we had put in place 2 years ago, this is actually would be the 3rd year, to increase athletic supplements. I think it was maybe the late 90s since that anything had been done with those athletic supplements. So we have money in there for that, but because of the tightness of the revenue, that 3rd year or step, we're going to have to divide into this year and next year, so it'll actually become a 4-year process. Also, we found out we were not competitive with psychologists with surrounding districts. We currently pay our psychologists a stipend of $3,000. This is adding an additional $5,000 to each psychologist for a total of supplement of $8,000. And then we did have a little bit of a temporary salary increase in there as well. So 35 positions, $2.7 million. Now this is just Beechwood, since we took it out of the last picture. Total of 83 positions, almost $5.6 million. You'll see 18.1 of those positions coming from Lexington Middle, 34.35 coming from Pleasant Hill Middle School. So as those students transfer from Pleasant Hill Middle and Lexington Middle, some of the staff will go with those students. Obviously not all of them, because there's some things you can't transfer. You have to have an additional nurse, you have to have some additional secretaries, custodial staff, those kinds of positions. So for a net of 30.55 new positions for Beechwood at about $2.1 million. And then we have an increase in programs and services of about $263,000. So overall total of $2.359 million for the opening of Beechwood Middle School. So we saw without Beechwood, and then we saw with Beechwood. This is combining those two for everybody. We talked about the 59, excuse me, .1 certified and licensed professionals, increase of 8.45 net support positions, the reduction of the 3 central services administrative staff, the addition of the 1 school administrative staff, and then supplements, additional days, and temporary salaries, about $448,000. So overall for next year, increase in FTE of 65.55 at right about $4.8 million. So this is the support staff. You see a decrease of school support instructional. That's really due to a change in the requirements by the state. We can no longer have instructional assistants operating our computer lab that we have. So those has to be certified. So it's a reduction in number of positions for instructional support, mainly because of those computer lab assistants. But then that also adds to the increase in certified for those positions. We have additional 7 special needs support. That's really things like the primary, the high support primary instructional assistants, and then other areas of special needs, 2, and a job coach. So then we have other school support. A lot of this is coming from Beechwood. We have support housekeeping and custodial. And then we had the nurse that I mentioned for Beechwood. And then the rest being secretaries and bookkeepers. Most of the secretaries, I think, are at Beechwood also. And then we also have in here a central services support, and that's for maintenance. That's a carpenter. We've increased the square footage in our district by a lot. We've not added new staff at all. So this is at least adding 1 additional position for that. The layered safety, if you remember last year, the state governor talked about, they were going to fund some safety issues and programs for school districts. By the time the start of the school came around and they passed the budget, there was no money for safety. So that's when the board was gracious enough to add 4.45 mils for the first wave for that layered safety. For next year, this is adding to that. It's the board certified behavioral analyst. That includes 4 school safety officers. This is a contracted service through the police departments. It's a school resource officer for Beechwood, and then it's 3 other safety officers, one for Forts Pond and Payne Elementary, one for Saxagatha and Red Bank, and then one for White Knoll Elementary and Carolina Springs Elementary. And then last year, as a part of the safety, we added 7 mental health counselors. This was done through a partnership with the Department of Mental Health. Each one of those counselors we paid $20,000 for, so that was $140,000 this year. We're adding 7 more for next year, so that's another $140,000. So for the layered safety, a total of $578,000.
Mr. Butler, do you want to speak to the MOU?
Yeah, we can do that. We're digging in now to the memorandum of understanding that we have with Department of Health, because obviously it sounds like a really good deal, only paying the $20,000 for a mental health counselor, which it is. But the question arose, well, who's receiving the money for the billing of the students that they see, especially particularly Medicaid students? Well, currently mental health keeps that money. So we're in the process of trying to find out how much money that is, and could we possibly reduce that $20,000 even more, saying we need part of that reimbursement. So we're looking into that now.
Because that work is happening on our campus, so we provide the facility for that work to happen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Now we receive funding from the state for reading coaches and nurses. The problem is it doesn't cover our total actual cost, particularly with reading coaches. So that $64,000 you see up there, that's just the additional amount that the district's having to pick up for next year. If you go back to fiscal year 17, 18, and 19, and then add the $64,000, that brings the total shortfall to $617,000 that the district is now picking up. The problem is, as the students improve with their reading and do better on their tests, state tests, then they reduce our funding even more. And also for the nurses, what they allocate doesn't cover our actual cost. That's increasing by $41,000, bringing that total shortfall to $117,000. So the total shortfall for both next year will be $734,000.
Mr. Butler, can I ask a question about this? This might be for you, it might be for Dr. Talley. So the way that reading coaching funding works is the better we do and the more we achieve the way we're supposed to, the less funding we get?
Yes.
By design?
Yeah.
I mean,
And I guess they figure because you don't need it because your students are performing now. I can't tell you what the legislators think. I gave up a long time ago on that. Yeah.
So they are basically penalizing us for doing well.
Yeah. You know, we can still teach the students to read and do better if we kind of just talk them into, throw them the test, and, then we'd get more money, but that doesn't seem to be very popular with everybody else, so. Anyway.
I would just like to add one thing to that. I think it's important to note, and you all have seen our reading coaches in action. A goodly number of our reading coaches have doctorate degrees. And so, as John mentioned, the state gives a set amount for a reading coach, and then the districts have to make up the difference. So I don't apologize for the quality of our reading coaches. We want quality quality teachers and coaches in our building. So it's really an interesting setup there.
I mean, I think it's a good problem to have, but it's a weird problem to have, especially given the climate for education reform and some of the remedies that the legislature has proposed. This seems counterproductive to what they think will help.
It does. This is not the first time that the state has done something like this, dating back all the way to the academic assistance money. The more students you had that fell in the at-risk categories, the more money you would get from the state. Here again, so the worse you do, the more money you get. That's just their way of thinking. All right, so this actually comes from the South Carolina Department of Education website, and it's based on the House Ways and Means projections, which currently by district allocation is the only amounts out there that we see. There's nothing from the full House or the Senate out on their website right now. So total new state revenues, $6.1 million. And we look at the mandated expenditures, retirement and health insurance increases, $2.7 million. Certified 4% increase, 5.4. It's actually probably gonna be closer to 5.5. Certified step increase, 2.379 million. So the overall, excuse me, shortfall is about $4.4 million just for those three mandated expenditures.
Mr. Butler, help me understand the identification here. So total new state revenues, that does not include increases, or that's just new sources of revenue from the state?
That actually includes increases. As a matter of fact, that is the increase in state revenues coming from the state.
Okay. So if we look at the actual proposed budget and we see revenue from state sources, and I see a $13 million net increase from 1819 to 1920, why don't those numbers
Good question.
line up?
Yeah, good question. First of all, those numbers are what we budgeted last year to what we're budgeting for next year.
Okay.
All right, and these are actual allocations compared to our proposed allocations for next year. And also on that sheet that you have in front of you there, that you're looking at the 13 million, what up here does not include some state revenues. Act 388 is a good example. We
Right.
receive an additional, I don't even think it's
Close to $1 million.
$100,000.
Yeah.
But I've got another slide that'll cover the shortfall for Act 388. So that's the difference. This is actually actual. We under budgeted state revenue last year because after the year started, they actually increased the fringe. I think January increased the fringe allocation. And that was probably the biggest increase that we saw. So that's the reason for the difference.
So so what you're saying is we're budgeting for 13.5 million, but the actual from is predicted to be 6.1.
Yes, and the figures that you see there from the state budget from last year were supposed to be the final projections that the State Department posted on their website, but it didn't really end up being the final allocation that we received for this year.
Gotcha. And is that, those funds are received, I assume, over the course of time? They're not lump sum?
Right, it's monthly.
Monthly. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Butler, let me just, I think I understand. The step increases are basically, so you look at it's a spreadsheet, a grid, and I would look down and say, Mike Anderson is a teacher and he's been working 8 years. Next year he'll work 9 years, so he moves to the next block. That's the step increase, right?
Right.
Okay.
And also based on his degree, was bachelor's, master's, doctorate, whatever, yes. So we had some increases in programs and services, utilities and maintenance, a little over $300,000. That's bringing on Beechwood Middle School and also preparing for rate increases for other utilities and maintenance across the district. Like I said, if they raise the increased cost for electricity or for the utilities such as lights, then we've got to pay that. Contractual services, licensed professionals, that's contracting for occupational therapists, physical therapists, and psychologists, where we weren't able to find somebody to actually fill a position, so we have to contract for those services, which probably does cost us additional money. We talked about the 4 additional school resource officers. We have an increase in instructional services for mathematics professional.
Mr. Butler, this probably isn't a question for you, but I was at an event with Sheriff Kuhn last week, and he was telling me that they are just really struggling to find school resource officers for all the districts in Lexington County. I know you speak with him on a regular basis. Do we have kind of a plan in place because it takes a special person to be a school resource officer?
It does. So certainly one of their challenges is like any of our challenges is that, you could have 15 school resource officers in the budget, but they would have a hard time filling that role. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Salters, because I know they've had that conversation and about kind of how we're going to handle it.
Yeah, so what's happening, actually, we're getting the benefit of some other activities going on in some other districts in the county. There are some other municipalities who are taking over the resource officer role. So, for example, like the West Columbia PD would be taking over and hiring a resource officer at a school, and the county currently staffs that with an SRO, a county SRO. And so we're going to be able to move individuals from those openings to our facility. So they're already trained. They've been working as SROs, already employed with the county. And so we anticipate being able to fill these positions with those individuals. So
Great. Okay.
it's working out pretty well for us this time.
Great. Thank you.
So increase in instructional services, like I said, it's mathematics professional learning, and also increasing the number of existing lab sites, total of 441,000. Another initiative of Dr. Little's when he came here was to reduce the amount of fees that our parents are having to pay. So a couple of years ago, we started with, those supply sheets that we walk in Walmart and you get a supply sheet and they want you to buy all these supplies. So we went through those, particularly I think Mr. Bowers was pretty instrumental in that, and reducing the amount of those supplies that our parents were being asked to pay for. In the current year, the Lexington Technology Center reduced a good number of their fees. And they're proposing to reduce some more for next year also. But this particularly is really for middle school fees. It's reducing general consumable fees, English reading fees, and science lab fees. But we depend on those dollars. So if our parents and taxpayers aren't paying that, then we are supplementing that with an allocation to those middle schools. Background checks from human resources.
Just before you go on, I do want to say that Ms. Garish brought up us also looking into, I believe it was the parking fees as well as the optional insurance on the iPads, but they're not iPads next year, and so those are 2 additional fees. We're at least exploring and seeing what those are, what they look like, and kind of how they might play into the operations of the school and those kinds of things. The challenging thing is, as Mr. Butler said, is that most of the fees have been around a long time, and you got to kind of follow the thread about where they came from, why we have them, what the impact is. You got to trace them over time. So we'll certainly explore those as well.
Where do we find those fees in terms of the revenue? Where do those appear?
Where does those fees go to?
Or no. Where does it appear in terms of our revenue sheet?
They're not in there. They, those fees go into the school's individual
Okay.
pupil activity accounts. So if I collect a math workbook fee, then it's used to pay for the math workbook. But those are all deposited in the school's accounts and the pupil activity accounts.
And do we have, I imagine oversight's maintained, but is there an idea? I mean, is it 400,000 or is it 4 million or is it 400 million? Do we have a number of what that
Yeah,
revenue is?
District-wide, it's about $2 million.
About 2 million.
Yep. Another increase, background checks through human resources. I think the majority of this is an increase in number of background checks we're doing on volunteers. You know, the safety of our children is one of the biggest priorities for us. And the last thing we want is to have somebody in the classroom who shouldn't be in that classroom. So we're having to pay for those background checks. That's an additional $75,000. The Code to the Future supplies, $49,000. That's for our existing Code to the Future schools: White Knoll Elementary, Rocky Creek Elementary, New Providence Elementary, and Peon Elementary School. So total increase of $1.5 million. We do have some decreases. The startup supplies for our new schools, and if you think about it, the startup costs really come the year before the school opens. So in the current year, we had a lot of startup costs in there for Beechwood Middle School. So by the time the school opens, we have everything we need and it's ready to go. So there is a reduction there, but there's also an increase for the new Gilbert School, the Centerville Elementary School you heard Mr. Salters talk about earlier. So the net of that is a reduction of $127,000. Also have a reduction in executive leadership program of $122,000, and that's really reducing the amount we're paying for the New York City Leadership Academy. So we're cutting back on the amount that we're paying them. This is the sheet that Dr. Guyton was talking about. This is budgeted to budgeted, approved budget last year versus projected next year. Local growth of about $2.4 million, and that's really just through increased tax assessments. And then the state funding, mostly EFA and fringe allocation, what was budgeted last year and what we're projected to receive for next year, a difference of $13.5 million. The EIA transfer and the indirect cost, the EIA transfer really is for teachers' salary supplements and fringe that they give us the money in EFA, but we transfer it to the general fund. Otherwise, we'd have to cut like 10% or whatever the portion is off of every teacher's salary and charge it the EIA. It's just so much easier to transfer the EIA portion to the general fund and charge it also to the general fund. Indirect costs, that's due to our grants, particularly federal grants. It's kind of an overhead cost that we're allowed to charge. So an increase overall about $288,000. We're projecting currently to use operational balance of about $9.8 million. We use $9 million in the current year's budget, and hopefully by the second and third reading we'll be able to tighten that up and reduce that some. So overall increase in projected revenue is $17.1 million, and that's about a 6.1% increase.
Mr. Butler, where do you think our fund balance will be at the end of this year, when we finish this school year?
That's a good question. We've looked at projections on that, and I think it'll probably increase by 3 million, maybe 4 million, something like that. So probably around 54 million.
Okay.
Sounds like a lot of money. We currently have a board policy that we have to have at least 7% We're drafting a change in policy to make that 10%. If you look at the Government Finance Officers Association, they recommend a 2 months operating, which is between 16, 17%, and that's really about where we fall right now. It's about the 16, 17% for fund balance.
Well, I've been signing a lot of big notes recently, and our interest rates are contingent upon that fund balance too, correct? In their bond covenants?
That is correct, yeah. That's probably the one most important thing that
Right.
the bond rating agencies look at.
Yeah.
So as long as it's increasing, they're good. Now, for some reason, it would decrease, and we didn't say, oh, well, that was planned for whatever. It just reduced, and that becomes a concern for them. You know, we've been upgraded in our bond ratings twice in the past 8, 9 years. Even back in '09, when we were going to receive the first increase, when everybody was getting downgraded for their bond ratings, we actually received an increase in our bond rating. So we've been pretty strong with that.
Well, and I think just last week, an upstate school district was put on the caution list because of their fund balance.
That's right.
And actually, they had been warned, and then they didn't fix it.
That's right.
And so they're under management watch. And that's going to be a part of our report card, is the financial stability of the district starting next year, right?
That's right, yeah. And I actually served on that statewide committee for the guidance that given districts for what their fund balance and all should be. I was surprised to find out that at that time, 4 districts in the state of South Carolina actually had a negative fund balance. Basically, they're broke. So.
One thing that I had seen was a projected decrease of about 1.2 million based off of vehicle taxes that would fall under our local. Where does that come from?
Well, because I've asked the same question, and the way the county does that is you almost have to kind of project that, because they don't increase vehicle taxes until they've collected that month's vehicle taxes. So the last one we received was through March. It did not have April, May, and June's vehicle taxes in there. So you have to say, okay, for 3/4 of the year, you know, it increased this amount. If you extrapolate that out for the next 3 months, then it should be around this amount. But it's kind of an estimate of what that is going to be. But you're right. Right now it's less than what it was for the current year.
So Mr. Anderson needs to buy a new car. What you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I did my part. I bought my son a truck and paid over $1,000 in taxes for it. So.
We bought my daughter a 2000 Ford Taurus and paid $12 in property taxes, so we did our part.
Okay. Yeah, on my truck, I think I pay about $140, but it's, 13 years old and has 290,000 miles on it. So. I talked earlier about the loss in funding due to Act 388. This is a real simple calculation. You just take the amount of money we received from the state for Act 388 and compare that to the amount of money that we would have received on owner-occupied homes for school operations had it not been for Act 388. So for instance, last year, that was $41.3 million difference. Because as new homes are built, we receive no new money for the state for that home. It's not related to it at all, but yet they bring kids. So if you look across 10 years, cumulatively, it's been over $209 million that we've lost. That's an average of about $4.1 million each year, and like I said, that's cumulative. So we saw the revenue. This is the expenditures. Increase of $15.8 million in salary and related costs. Programs and services 1.3, total of 17.1 million. So that's 6.1% increase. Of that $15.8 million, right around half of that comes from the teachers' 4% in the step. And then the rest is for, growth, Beechwood, just regular growth that we have. This chart's just a breakdown of how our costs are split up. We are in the people business, so salaries and related costs, 87.62%. Programs and services, 7.61%, and then utilities and maintenance, 4.77%.
Mr. Butler, since, as of, I think, Saturday, SC&G is completely gone, and SCANA's completely gone, and we're now Dominion, and they talked about lowering our utility rates and our payments. Have we seen any help with that, with our utility costs from Dominion?
I think we've seen some reduction, yeah.
We've seen a little bit, but not much yet.
Not enough to make a big difference.
And let me go back, Mr. Butler. So back to Act 8388. I know in times past we've also backed into the millage that we would have not had to raise or would be able to reduce today for a business community if Act 388 had not passed. So again, maybe with the next reading we could back into that. And you may know it off the top of your head already, but.
Yeah, it's about $15 million for 1 year now that we're not getting. So, all right. This is besides not paying us what we should receive through Act 388. They also put a cap on the amount of millage that we're allowed to increase. We're allowed to increase by the South CPI plus the growth in our district. Those numbers come from the state, so that's 4.72%. We're currently at 322.4 mills, which would allow us to increase millage 15.21 mills. This proposed budget for our first reading does not have a millage increase, so it doesn't generate any additional revenue. If we increase the 15.21 mills, that would generate around $4.3 million. So you could do anything in between there, but that just gives you a picture of how much we could go up and what could be generated. So in summary, budget includes 65.55 positions, includes a step increase for all eligible employees, includes a 4% increase for staff paid on the teacher salary schedule. It includes funding to meet the state and federal requirements. It also includes funding to cover the required inflationary cost. And as I said, does not include any proposed millage increase for operations. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Butler, before we entertain questions, will you talk a little bit about some of the things for considerations that we discussed regarding for next time, some things that aren't in here that we've still had conversations about?
Yeah. And as we go through the budget process, we come up across certain things that is not in the budget that probably need to be added to the budget. Another thing we're doing is I'm going back through the past 3 years, looking for areas that seems we may be trending over budgeting expenditures, and look at those where we may be able to reduce the budget in those areas that would free up some money for other things, or possibly reduce the use of our fund balance, those types of things. So you'll see some differences by the time we get to the second reading.
I'm sorry, and I didn't lead you I don't know that I led you very well. Mr. Salter, do you remember we talked about those, I think there were 3 things
Well, we had,
in particular?
we had a couple items. One was obviously support staff salary increase. There was some, obviously some interest in trying to do something for our support staff. And then we're also looking at our substitutes and something we can do there to remain competitive. And we have different models that Mr. Stacy has provided for us about how districts are handling that, and some ideas that our own human resource department has come up with to try to remain competitive with providing resources in the classrooms. And so those are things that we'll be looking at for, for second reading. Hopefully we'll see some more revenue coming in. We'll have another month of auto collections, vehicle collections, and that'll serve to clear some of that up as well. So we'll be able to see where we stand.
And a third thing we talked about was the increased pool positions.
Yeah, and that's right. I was going to mention that one as well. The pool positions, we have 5 in the budget, and we've had in the past few years a good many more than that. And those are positions that are just kind of placeholders, so that as when students come in or we have needs come up throughout the course of the year, typically those are in special education. We have a placeholder to be able to hire a position, and that's already in the budget and planned for. So as I said, we have 5 now. We hope to be able to increase that to at least 10. I know that's a big priority for our instructional services team.
Yeah, and as we receive additional information from the state between what the Senate and the House has agreed upon, I anticipate the state revenue going up a little anyway. Also, I had some questions the last time our assessments came out, looking at what they were in February and what they were in March. As Dr. Guyton mentioned, the vehicle taxes being less, but also taxes on taxable real property within the district in that 1 month period went down $1 million. So I've asked the state, what's that caused by? So they're supposed to be looking into it. I've talked with the county auditor's office, and they're working with the county treasurer's office to try to see if they can determine why that is. So hopefully they've left something out that they need to add back into those assessments.
Mr. Butler, how much, I can't remember what you said the calculation was for support staff for like per percent if we were to increase it? What would 1% be?
The cost?
Yes.
It's $400-some thousand for 1%.
Okay. And then another question I have, and this goes to the Drive to 35. This might be actually more of a Dr. Little or Mike Stacy question. When we started the Drive to 35, I had just come on the board, so it was almost 3 years ago. And one of the things that you provided was a comparison of all the area school districts. And as we have moved forward, many of them have moved forward as well. So I feel like our context of competitiveness has changed. So I'd really like to see a new analysis of when we get to our next increase, where we'll be compared to the folks that are in our area, just because, they haven't stayed while we've moved forward. They've moved forward too. And I feel like that the playing field has changed just a little bit.
Lexington two's added a signing bonus, or at least their billboards over in their district say that.
In our district.
Yeah, in our district.
Yeah, really. Sure, we can do that. Although I think you'll see that we've probably increased a little bit more than what they have, just because we've gone up more than what the state says we need to go up. So yeah, we can look at that. I think for the past 3 years, a teacher's salary, including the step, has gone up by like 11%. This next year, I'll probably put it closer to about, for 4 years, about 17%. Mm-hmm. So overall, I think you'll say we're gaining some ground on those salary schedules.
Well, and this is just kind of a musing. I sent an article to Ms. Smith earlier that the Greenville County School Board had a first reading last night about raising millage for salary increases for their teachers, across the board, and it was a pretty significant salary increase. And I know we are undergoing a millage increase because of our building plan. And I would like to know, maybe the folks here can kind of put their ears to the ground, if there would be stomach for a small millage increase for support staff salary increases. I think that's important to know. We want our staff to feel respected and appropriately compensated, and a way to do that without having to cut something else would be a small millage increase.
Right, I do think although they'll still see a raise because of the step, I do think some of the support staff may cause a morale issue.
I agree.
If they see
I agree.
teachers getting 4% plus a 2% step and they're getting a step. So I think you might see some issues there, even though the teachers is driven by the state, not us. So.
You know, we like to be inclusive with the support staff to get them in the same mode of thinking as our certified staff, as our administrators. We want them included in the educational process of today, and so we want to retain those people. You know, it's an investment when we spend the time to bring them to that level and then can't pay them justly.
Right. And we've, I've done, there's a group of us, school business officials around the state, that we kind of have an email group. And so actually Greenville was the one who started this survey, wanting to know what we're doing, not only for certified, but what everybody's doing for support staff. So we do have that information to look at. There's a number of districts who are giving the support staff 4% also. Some are giving 2% or 1%, but most of them seem to be trying to do something for the support staff.
If we were to, and this may be a question for Dr. Little as well, if we were to put the numbers aside and said, if we were to look at our budget and try to create a story from it, what do we value? What does our budget say about what we value? What would that be?
Well, I think one of the big things that you see that we value is safety and security. We've really taken in this particular budget, I think, the next steps about that layered security approach, with now 15 mental health counselors, with SRO coverage at our schools in a much more comprehensive fashion. The addition of the behavioral specialist working with our students with greater and greater needs. And as a pediatrician, I don't need to tell you the types of challenges our children face, especially when it comes to mental health issues and behavioral issues and trying to make really positive decisions. So on the one hand, that's one of the things that I'm most proud of. I think we also speak to maintaining our competitiveness when it comes to pay. I would tell you that the teacher shortage in South Carolina is a real thing, and that we must maintain competitiveness if we want to recruit the best and the brightest in our classrooms. And again, our classroom teachers are fundamental to what we do, and we're only as good as the people that we have in our schools, and I think that's a big piece. The other element here that I think we're continuing to work on is that over the last 3 years, now some of this is a continuation story, so it's not like this is the first year of the story. So the layered safety is 2 years in the making. The drive to 35, I guess now is 2 or 3 years in the making. The maintaining class sizes this year is 2 or 3 years in the making, because what we've been doing is working to reduce class sizes, especially at the K1 and 2 level. Our class sizes there, I would still argue, are too large, and we need to continue to move in that process. But what we've done is we're able to keep the progress that we've made. I would say for me, those are the three big story points that this budget does. And if you wanted a fourth one, I think the fourth story point is that it captures an opening of Beechwood Middle School that's going to be a real game changer for our 6, 7, and 8 long-term growth, and really sets us up for that school to serve our community. So I think those are the four big things, but really I think even beyond Beechwood, I think the big three is when it comes to our schools are going to be safer, we're going to continue to pay a competitive salary to our teachers, and that we're going to be able to enhance their job experience and their work life. Their work environment is very important. It's not all about pay. I think teachers will tell you that. You get you can double pay, but if I make your work conditions worse and worse and worse, pay's only going to go so far. But it's a both and I think this budget approaches those things and captures those elements.
And also, from at least from a proposal perspective of a net zero millage increase, you certainly can't deny the sort of the core that the school district is within the community and the relationships that exist and how businesses and the school district kind of coexist together. And as we all know from Act 388, the ones most influenced by a millage increase are businesses, citizens from property tax or from vehicle tax increase, and then second homeowners, I think, are the big ones that are most influenced by a millage increase. So, but again, it's a delicate balance between that and trying to understand at least an additional anywhere from $0 to $4 million increase in revenue.
Well, and again, I think I would add that conversation about a millage increase really can take place over the next couple of months as the numbers begin to come into focus, as our purposes and goals as y'all begin to dive more deeply into the process, and we have more conversations about where we want to go and where we want to be. We just wanted to show you what one without a millage increase is, and then if this board decides that a millage increase is something that you'd like to explore, and certainly that's well within your authority and conversation to have. But we wanted to show you what it looks like without it. I think we'll still be able. I think as our numbers continue to come in, I think I'm maybe a little more optimistic sometimes in our finance offices. I think that's a product, a character trait of finance officers. But I think I'm going to be a little more optimistic and say it's my hope that we can still do something in addition to the step. Again, to be clear, a step does mean a pay increase for our support staff. But I think maybe we can do something in addition to that as well. Just as things come in, but we'll be looking at that certainly and really trying to zero in on what that looks like.
Also, just as for your knowledge, according to our debt service schedule, the increase on the debt service or capital side looks like for the next year might be 4.7 mils.
I have a question, Mr. Butler.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, you told Kyle that there was a balance of $2 million. Did that include iPad fees and parking fees, or was that just one or the other?
That's all fees total.
All fees total.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And athletic fees, do students get a discount if they have free or reduced lunch?
Yes.
They do.
Wait a minute. Not for athletic fees. Most of the other fees they do, but not for athletic.
Not for athletic fees. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. If right.
Okay. And has anyone looked into a partnership with Lexington County Sheriff's Department where we give them some space in our schools and they work out of there? Because the new school on Highway 1, Centerville, there's a substation, almost directly beside there.
All of our schools that have a full-time resource officer have a dedicated office for that resource officer, and we welcome any of the other area deputies, road deputies, to come into the schools. In fact, we invite them to come in and eat lunch and do paperwork. And so we try to give them that space anytime they want to use it. So we are working with them on that.
We're actually kind of a victim about technology on this because their technology has become more advanced. So when they put all their stuff in their computer, and it automatically, what we were told when we talked about doing something, I think maybe at White Knoll High School with this, is that they drive by the police station and
It uploads
it
everything.
automatically uploads all their stuff. And so it helps them to be out there and driving out. So, I mean, it,
And they're also not doing, the policing has changed, so they're not doing a lot of their paperwork, if you will, back in an office. They're doing it all right there in the car, in a computer that's integrated into the car. So, but we certainly do everything we can to encourage them to come into our buildings. And we do dedicate a space in each building. Yeah, Beechwood Middle School, it has an office dedicated for the resource officer, and there'll be a space in each of our new campuses for that as well.